A virgin fugitive decides to donate her liver to a sick millionaire with only 1 week to live. Then he wakes up wanting to visit her in prison, but upon arrival discovers. Comment giving a score from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The police siren sliced through the humid early morning air like a knife, echoing through the narrow alleys of a neighborhood forgotten by prosperity. The 25-year-old woman ran through the shadows, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to leap from her chest. 3 years, 3 long years living like a ghost, always looking over her shoulder, always with fear stuck to her skin like a second layer of clothing she could never take off. Her bare feet found a puddle of dirty water, and she felt the cold rise up her legs as she hid behind a dumpster. The acrid smell of rusty iron mixed with the aroma of spoiled food, creating an atmosphere that perfectly defined her reality for the past few years. She had become accustomed to this world of leftovers, of remnants, of places where people like her could exist without asking questions or giving explanations. The police raid had started at dawn, as it always did in that forgotten corner of the sprawling metropolis. Uniformed men invading dilapidated houses, rummaging through the few belongings of people who already had almost nothing. She knew they weren't specifically looking for her, but her paranoia had become a survival instinct. Every siren was an alert, every uniform a potential threat. During these years on the run, she had sustained her shadowy existence with informal jobs that paid in cash and didn't ask about IDs. Cleaning offices during the wee hours, handing out flyers on busy street corners, loading and unloading in small businesses that needed strong arms and silent mouths. She slept in temporary shelters when she could find a spot, or on park benches when luck wasn't on her side. Her life had become a sequence of identical days, each a small victory for the simple possibility of seeing the sun rise again. She had learned to live with the bare minimum, to be invisible, to leave no trace. Her true identity was buried under layers of fear and distrust, protected like a treasure that could destroy her if discovered. That specific morning, something went wrong. Maybe it was the accumulated exhaustion from sleepless nights, maybe the hunger that constantly accompanied her, weakening her reflexes. When she tried to scale the wall that separated the alley from the main street, her foot slipped on the damp brick. The fall was quick and painful. The impact against the concrete floor knocked the air out of her lungs and sent a shooting pain through her left leg. She tried to get up, but the world spun violently around her. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, and she realized she had hit her head with considerable force. The police found her there, semi-conscious and bleeding, more a victim of urban violence than a dangerous fugitive. They didn't initially recognize her. 3 years of life on the streets had drastically changed her appearance. The face, that was once round and youthful, now showed the sharp angles of chronic malnutrition. Her hair, once well-groomed, was discolored and rough as straw. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later, and she was transported to the city's public hospital in a semi-conscious state. During the trip, fragments of memories danced in her feverish mind. She remembered the day her life had crumbled, when the accusations arose out of nowhere like a devastating storm. She remembered the look of disappointment on faces she loved, the feeling of sinking in quicksand without being able to explain her innocence. In the hospital, doctors worked quickly to stabilize her condition. The head wound wasn't as serious as it initially seemed, but she had lost a lot of blood and showed signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition. While caring for her external injuries, it was necessary to perform more detailed tests to assess possible internal damage. It was during these routine exams that something extraordinary was discovered. The technician responsible for the blood analysis noticed something unusual in the results and requested additional tests. Hours later, the discovery was confirmed by 3 different laboratories. The young woman possessed an extremely rare blood type with unique genetic markers that made her a potential donor for cases of extreme medical complexity. The information reached the specialized medical team just when the city's hospital system was facing a desperate case. On the other side of the metropolis, in the most luxurious and well-equipped hospital in the region, a young man was fighting against time in a battle that not even all his fortune could win. The 30-year-old businessman was known throughout the city not only for his wealth, but for his movie star good looks and his reputation for ruthless coldness in business. Heir to a family empire built over decades, he had exponentially multiplied the wealth he received, becoming a feared and respected figure in the corporate world. His investments in the stock market had yielded astronomical profits, and part of his fortune was invested in international funds and even in cryptocurrencies, following the most modern trends in capital diversification. He owned properties in several countries, a collection of cars worth more than many companies, and a lifestyle that few could even imagine. But all this wealth, all this power, all these carefully accumulated assets meant nothing in the face of the diagnosis he had received 2 weeks earlier: fulminant liver failure, a rare condition that attacked the organ so aggressively that doctors gave him only days to live. The best specialists in the country had been consulted. Experimental treatments, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, were tried without success. His only hope was a transplant, but finding a compatible donor for his specific case seemed impossible. Until that morning, when the hospital system connected 2 worlds that should never have met, united only by the urgency of the life that was slipping between the fingers of time. The news of the compatibility reached the medical authorities like a ray of hope in the middle of the storm. The director of the public hospital where the young woman was interned received the call from the private medical center with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. He had never before dealt with such a delicate situation. A fugitive from justice who could be the only salvation for one of the most powerful men in the city. The next hours unfolded like a complex dance between medical protocols, legal issues, and the urgency of the rapidly dwindling time. Lawyers were called, judges consulted on an emergency basis, and an unprecedented agreement was established. The young woman would be informed about her situation and would have the right to choose, but any decision she made would be executed under strict custody. When she fully awakened from sedation, she found herself in a hospital room under constant surveillance. 2 police officers stood guard at the door, and she immediately realized that her identity had been discovered. The weight of 3 years on the run collapsed on her shoulders like an avalanche, but strangely, it also brought a sense of relief. The race was over. The social worker who came to talk to her spoke in a soft tone, but the words sounded like distant echoes of an impossible dream. There was a man dying, she explained, someone who needed part of her liver to survive. The compatibility between them was so rare that doctors estimated the chances of finding another donor at less than 1 in a million. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed. For years, she had been hunted like a criminal, treated as a danger to society, forced to live in the shadows as if her existence were a stain on the social fabric. Now suddenly, she discovered herself as the only person capable of saving the life of someone who represented everything she had fled from: power, privilege, social acceptance. The description they gave her of the man who was agonizing on the other side of the city was vague, protected by medical privacy issues, but sufficient to paint a clear picture. A young businessman, heir to a fortune built over generations, someone whose investments moved millions of dollars and whose assets could easily buy her freedom 1,000 times over. During the long hours that followed, she was alone with her thoughts, watching the bars on the window of the hospital room that had become her new prison. The police had confirmed that she would be transferred to a correctional facility as soon as she was discharged. Her life as a fugitive had come to an end, and ahead of her lay only the grim prospect of decades behind bars. But there was a choice to make, a decision that could give meaning to all those years of suffering. She thought of her mother, who had passed away believing that her daughter was guilty of terrible crimes. She thought of friends who distanced themselves when the accusations arose, of lost opportunities, of dreams buried under the weight of circumstances. Kindness had always been a striking characteristic of her personality, something that not even the harshest years had managed to completely eradicate. Even when the world had turned against her, even when it seemed that there was no reason to trust humanity, something deep inside her kept burning a flame of compassion that refused to be extinguished. The next morning, when the doctors came to get her final answer, she surprised them with the firmness of her decision. Yes, she would donate part of her liver to save the life of the stranger, not out of gratitude to the system that had persecuted her, not out of hope for judicial clemency, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Preparations for the surgery began immediately. State-of-the-art medical equipment was transported between hospitals. Specialized teams coordinated every detail of the procedure, and strict security agreements ensured that the mutual anonymity of the patients was preserved. On the night before the operation, she was transferred in top secret to the medical center where the surgery would be performed. The contrast between the public hospital where she had spent the last few days and that private institution was shocking. Marble corridors replaced cracked ceramic floors. Works of art decorated walls that were previously just raw functionality. During the last hours before the surgery, she found herself reflecting on the strangeness of fate. For 3 years, she had run desperately from a justice she considered unfair, struggling to preserve a freedom that had become more prison than liberation. Now, voluntarily, she was handing over not only her freedom, but part of her own body to save someone she didn't even know. The sedatives began to take effect as she was taken to the operating room. Her last conscious memory was the sound of medical monitors and the strange feeling of peace that washed over her. She had made a decision that would define not only her destiny, but also that of a stranger who was agonizing in another wing of the same hospital. The surgery lasted 8 hours. 2 medical teams worked simultaneously, one carefully removing the healthy portion of the young woman's liver, the other preparing the businessman to receive the organ that could save him. The procedure was technically perfect, but the real test would be in the coming weeks, when the bodies of both would have to accept the radical change that had occurred. When she woke up in the recovery unit, she found herself again in custody, but this time in a special cell inside the hospital's own prison ward. The pain from the surgery mingled with the reality that her life as a free woman had officially ended. The next years would be lived behind bars, paying for a crime she had never committed. On the other side of the city, in a luxurious hospital suite decorated with exotic flowers and letters of support from important figures, the businessman was fighting against rejection of the new organ. His vital signs fluctuated dangerously, and doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize his body. He did not know who had saved his life, had no idea of the sacrifice that a stranger had made in his favor. The businessman's recovery was unlike anything the doctors had ever witnessed before. During the first weeks after the surgery, while his body slowly accepted the new organ, something extraordinary began to happen. Strange dreams invaded his nights, visions of places he had never visited, sensations of experiences he had never lived. He saw himself running through dark alleys, his heart racing with fear, feeling the weight of injustice like a stone in his chest. He woke up with trembling hands, cold sweats, with the vivid impression of having spent nights on park benches or sleeping on the cold floor of overcrowded shelters. The feeling of constant hunger haunted him even when he was well fed, and inexplicable tears sprang from his eyes when he least expected it. During his 30 years of privileged life, he had never experienced anything remotely like genuine compassion for the less fortunate. His elite education and social environment had shielded him from the reality of poverty, creating an invisible barrier between him and the suffering of others. But now, something had changed deeply within him. Doctors tried to explain the changes as normal side effects of immunosuppressant drugs, but he knew there was something more. It was as if part of his donor's soul had transferred along with the organ, bringing with it memories that were not his, emotions he had never felt, a completely different worldview. For 2 whole months, he struggled against these strange sensations, trying to resume his usual routine. He returned to his company offices, resumed strategic meetings, analyzed investment reports that moved millions in stocks and international funds. But nothing seemed to have the same meaning as before. His extraordinary profits, his growing dividends, his wealth that grew automatically through sophisticated investments, all of it began to seem empty and pointless. The obsession with discovering who had saved his life grew with each passing day. He discreetly hired private investigators, using his influence to access protected medical information, pulling strings with his contacts in the judicial and hospital system. What he initially discovered was shocking. His savior was a fugitive from justice, a woman accused of serious crimes who had lived in the shadows for years. The information should have reassured him, confirming that he had been saved by someone who actually owed something to society. But the dreams continued, and with them came an inexplicable certainty that there was much more to this story than met the eye. The gratitude he felt was not just for the life that had been given back to him, but for something deeper, a connection that transcended logic. After 3 months of secret investigations, he finally obtained special authorization to visit her at the Women's Correctional Facility. He used all his political and economic clout, made generous donations to funds for modernizing the prison system, and moved bureaucratic mountains to get that meeting he considered essential. On the day of the visit, he woke up with his heart racing, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation that he couldn't explain. He dressed more simply than usual, instinctively feeling that ostentation would be inappropriate. During the drive to the penitentiary, the strange memories intensified, as if his body recognized that he was approaching the source of those dreamlike experiences. The Women's Correctional Facility was located in an industrial area of the city, surrounded by high walls and guard towers that created an oppressive atmosphere even for visitors. When he arrived at the main gate and presented his special documentation, he was led through a series of rigorous security procedures that contrasted sharply with the VIP treatment he received everywhere else. It was then that he received the news that hit him like a punch to the gut. The young woman had been transferred 3 weeks earlier. The reason for the transfer was explained cautiously by the prison staff, but the details were disturbing. Other inmates had discovered her identity, and for reasons involving unwritten codes of the prison environment, she had become a target. The beating had been brutal and cowardly. A group of women, led by an inmate with connections to organized crime, considered her a traitor for having helped someone rich and powerful. For them, any act of kindness in favor of the elite was seen as betrayal of the cause of the oppressed. The cruel irony of the situation did not go unnoticed. She was being punished for having done exactly what her natural kindness had led her to do. The transfer had been necessary to protect her physical integrity, but the chosen destination was even more disheartening. She had been sent to a maximum security penitentiary in a distant city, an institution known for its dire conditions and for housing the most dangerous criminals in the system. During the drive back home, he felt a hopelessness that he had never experienced. All his wealth, all his influence, all his power to buy practically anything he wanted seemed useless in the face of the implacable bureaucracy of the prison system. For the first time in his life, he had found something that his money couldn't solve instantly, but the obsession with finding her only intensified. He redirected a significant portion of his financial resources to this search, hiring the best lawyers, specializing in criminal law, investigators with connections to the correctional system, and consultants who understood the bureaucratic intricacies of prison transfers. Over the next 6 months, his life was transformed into a frantic quest. He traveled to 3 different states, visited dozens of penitentiaries, filed lawsuits to gain access to transfer records, and gradually assembled a map of the path she had taken through the prison system. It was during this obsessive search that he began to discover disturbing details about the original case that had landed her in prison. The evidence against her seemed too flimsy to support such a severe conviction. Witnesses had changed their testimonies suspiciously, important documents had mysteriously disappeared, and the true beneficiary of the crimes remained in the shadows. The more he investigated, the more convinced he became that he had been saved by an innocent woman, a victim of a carefully orchestrated setup. The gratitude he felt gradually transformed into something more complex, a sense of justice he had never experienced, an urgent need to correct an injustice that transcended any personal obligation he might have to his savior. When he finally located her at the maximum security penitentiary, after months of desperate searching, what he found left him completely devastated. The woman who had sacrificed her freedom to save him was being held in solitary confinement for her own protection, in a solitary cell where she spent 23 hours a day without significant human contact. The first meeting between them took place in a cold and impersonal visiting room, separated by a thick glass that prevented any physical contact. She had lost a lot of weight since the surgery, her face marked by the violence she had suffered and the months of isolation. But her eyes still shone with that inexplicable purity that not even the worst circumstances had managed to extinguish. During the first few minutes, she refused to look at him directly, suspicious of his intentions. To her, he represented everything she had learned to fear: privilege, power, the ability to manipulate the system in his own favor. She thought he was there only to ease his conscience, to feel better about himself for having been saved by a criminal. But there was something in his voice, a genuine sincerity that gradually broke down her defenses. He spoke about the strange dreams, about the memories that were not his, about how he felt her pain as if it were his own. He told her about his desperate search for months, about how he had moved heaven and earth to find her. Slowly, she began to realize that this man was not just another bored rich man seeking entertainment in her tragedy. In subsequent visits, which always took place on Wednesdays, she began to open up. She told her version of the facts that had led her to that situation, a narrative very different from the one contained in the official records. She had worked as an administrative assistant in a medium-sized company, a simple job that gave her pride and independence. Her life was quiet, predictable, surrounded by a few solid friendships and a romantic relationship that had lasted for 3 years. The most shocking twist came when she revealed who was really responsible for her downfall. Her boyfriend at the time, a man she loved deeply and trusted blindly, worked at the same company in a financial supervisory position. For months, he had embezzled significant amounts from the company's funds, using his position and internal knowledge to mask the irregularities. When the internal audit began to uncover the discrepancies, he executed a meticulously crafted plan to transfer all the blame to her. He planted evidence on her computer, altered records to show transactions authorized by her, and convinced other colleagues to testify against her credibility. The cruelest thing of all was how he managed to do this, using the intimate knowledge he had about her, her insecurities, her fears, to create a convincing narrative that she was capable of such crimes. The businessman listened to every word with a growing mixture of indignation and determination. His experience in business allowed him to recognize the signs of a well-orchestrated setup, and every detail she revealed confirmed his suspicions that he had been saved by a completely innocent woman. During the months that followed, he transformed his quest for justice into a personal crusade. He hired the best criminal lawyers in the country, invested fortunes in private investigations, and used all his influence to reopen the case. His financial resources, which previously served only to multiply his wealth through sophisticated investments, now had a purpose that gave him true meaning. The investigation revealed a network of corruption far more complex than anyone had imagined. Her ex-boyfriend had not acted alone, but as part of a larger scheme involving fraudulent suppliers and corrupt employees in various companies in the region. The embezzled money had been used not only for personal enrichment, but also to bribe witnesses and even employees of the judicial system. The most disturbing discovery came when the investigators hired by him discovered that the ex-boyfriend had tried to ensure that the businessman did not survive the surgery. Using part of the stolen money, he had bribed a hospital employee to sabotage the procedure, knowing that if the businessman died, there would never be investigations into the donor, and the truth about her innocence would never come to light. For an entire year, he fought tirelessly through the judicial system, facing bureaucratic resistance, vested interests, and the inertia of a system that rarely admits its own mistakes. He spent millions of dollars in legal fees, technical expertise, and forensic investigations. His obsession with justice consumed much of his time and energy, transforming him from a cold and calculating businessman into someone genuinely concerned about the well-being of another person. In parallel with the legal battle, a deep emotional connection developed between them through weekly visits and the letters they exchanged. She began to see in him not only the powerful man who had moved mountains for her sake, but someone who genuinely cared about her suffering and her dignity. He had found in her something that his privileged life had never provided, a person who valued him not for his money or status, but for his actions and character. The mutual gratitude slowly transformed into something deeper and overwhelming. During the long conversations through the prison glass, they shared not only the details of their cases, but their hopes, fears, dreams, and disappointments. An emotional intimacy grew between them, fueled by shared adversity and the common struggle for justice. When the truth finally came out and her innocence was officially recognized, she had spent 4 whole years behind bars. The ex-boyfriend and his accomplices were arrested and convicted, substantial compensation was established by the state, and she was officially acquitted of all charges. The day of her release was charged with emotion. He was waiting outside the penitentiary when the gates opened, holding a simple bouquet of wildflowers. He had learned through her letters that she preferred the simplicity of nature to artificial luxury. When she came out, thin and pale, but with her eyes shining with renewed hope, they hugged for the first time, a hug that sealed not only her freedom, but also the love that had grown in the most improbable circumstances. In the months that followed, she had to relearn to live in freedom, a process that he patiently accompanied. He offered not only emotional support, but also opportunities for her to rebuild her life with dignity and independence. Together, they created a foundation dedicated to helping people wrongly convicted, using part of his fortune to ensure that others did not go through what she had faced. The love that had been born through the bars, fueled by letters and conversations, limited by time and space, blossomed in freedom like a flower that finally finds the sun. He discovered that all his money, all his properties and investments were worth less than the true and pure love that she offered him. She found in him not only the man who had fought tirelessly for her justice, but someone who loved her for who she really was, not despite her history, but because of the strength and kindness she had demonstrated during the darkest moments. When they married, 2 years after her release, the ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. She had chosen to wear a modest dress. He had dispensed with all the luxury traditionally associated with weddings of his social class. What mattered was not ostentation, but the genuine commitment between two people who had learned the true value of life, justice, and love through shared suffering and the joint overcoming of obstacles that seemed impossible to overcome.